Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Vince.
And you know who I am.
I do. But
I'm Gina.
Yeah. And we're Vince and Gina of Back Porch Chats. Those of you that's watching this on YouTube, you notice I got my T-shirt on and got my cup. So we love the merchandise. So
yeah, I think since we started with those cups, that's all I've seen you drink out of.
I love my cup.
Yeah. Hey, you want to tell people what we did yesterday? Was it yesterday or the day before? Monday. It was so exciting.
That was awesome. And my age kicked in. Dr. Steve
Lloyd.
Steve Lloyd is the doctor that Dope Sick, the Hulu series, Michael Keaton played his life.
Right.
He's a big part of that whole series, Dope Sick. We got to meet him Monday.
Mm-hmm.
What a great guy. We got to talk to him, and he's going to do a podcast with us.
Yeah, so look out for that.
Yeah. And his life story ties right in with several of the stories that we've done, and it ties in with our guest today. Kind of a lot of the same stories. It's just amazing. I am a childhood sex abuse trauma survivor, and it kicked in very, very deep with my drug and alcohol use and some other mental health issues and stuff that I had. And you've got some of the same story, and we really just have got a lot of people that have come on and are willing to talk about this. And we got another guest today that wants to talk about the connection between that abuse and the mental illness and addiction and the stuff, and then the courageous path that it takes.
Right.
Takes so much courage for us to recover from this. So I'm going on and already dominating the podcast, and we ain't even got started yet.
Hey, I've been doing some video editing, and I've learned how to cut you out.
Oh, okay.
All right. So our guest today is Charlene Madden, and she is here to talk about share her story of childhood sexual abuse, violence, domestic abuse, and mental illness. She's also had some difficulty with suicidal ideation, and I've been listening to her, and she's very open and authentic, and absolutely love it. Her and I have a lot in common. We were talking about that just before we came on. This whole running away from our problems and our childhood sexual abuse. And as you know, my son died of suicide, and so we got a lot of that to go. That we can talk about. And one of the things I loved in her bio is that she wants to help remove the stigmas that surround these topics. And that's something that you and I are really working hard to do. And that's part of what this, our Back Porch Chats is about. So remove the stigmas so that we can talk about the trauma.
That's what we got to.
Yeah. Charlene's a mother of 3 children. I'm curious, Charlene, if they're girls, boys, or otherwise. She's a wife, a daughter, Reiki practitioner, and a woman's empowerment coach. Anyways, hello, Charlene. How you doing today?
Good morning. I'm fantastic. Thank you.
Good. And it also says a proud Toronto Maple Leafs fan. What is it? Down here in Alabama, we only have one sport. And God is our coach. I'm just teasing. Some people want to appreciate that. What is the Toronto Maple Leafs? What is that?
I live in Canada, so It is hockey.
Oh,
so it is one of the original 6 hockey teams. So it's that's my team. It was bred into me from the time I was 3. So.
Right. We had Teo Fleury on about a month ago or 2 months ago. He was on the show. So you might want to take a look back at that. We didn't know who he was either. Like Vince says, it's not even football. It's college football. When I was in California, everyone watched NFL, and I came here and they're asking me about college. And I'm like, well, we didn't watch that in California. I have no idea what that is. Sunday was a football day there. So, all right, Charlene, why don't you tell us a little bit about your life and what what you're here for?
So my story starts when I was young, which is most of us who've experienced childhood trauma. It's when it starts. I grew up in a very dysfunctional family early on. I was the youngest of 4 children. I had an older sister who was 4 years older and 2 half brothers that were twins that were 8 years older than myself. And My dad was a very severe alcoholic, and not just being an alcoholic, he was a violent alcoholic. And unfortunately, because my brothers were not biologically his, they were the ones that faced the brunt of the physical abuse. And when I was about 3.5, my mom had to make an extremely difficult decision, and that was she had to choose to stay in the marriage or try to save her children. And my father was fine with her taking the boys because they weren't his, but he didn't want her taking my sister and I. So she made the decision to save the children that she could, and she left the household. My dad, being such a bad alcoholic, though, he was not able to care for 2 young children. I was 3.5. My sister was 7.5. So about a week in, he contacted my grandparents and said, "Hey, can you take the kids?" And my grandmother didn't skip a beat. She said, "Absolutely, we will take the kids." And growing up, my grandmother to me was the closest thing to a saint that you could possibly find. She was very strong for her time period that she grew up. I mean, she believed that women should get a good education, make their own money, be independent, not have to depend on anybody. And I always say that I learned that lesson probably a little too well in my life. And as wonderful and caring and supportive as my grandmother was, my grandfather, unfortunately, was a pedophile. So I started, my sister and I, experiencing sexual abuse at his hands when I was 3.5. And this carried on for about 9 years. And it was really weekly. My grandmother was always giving to other people, but she took one night a week to take some self-care. And for her, that was to go to bingo. That was her thing. So every Monday night, she would jump in the car and off to bingo she would go. And of course, that was the perfect opportunity for my grandfather. And, I always remember that, my sister and I, we single beds in the same bedroom. And, every Monday night we would just be laying in bed listening for that squeaky step that we had in the house as my grandfather would make his way up the stairs, and we would be waiting because we knew what was coming. So this went on again for, 9 years. And, I spent a lot of time outdoors as a kid, just trying to stay away from, the house and just be outside as much as I could. And when my sister was 16, she went to school one day and basically just had a nervous breakdown because at 16, she was afraid that she was going to become pregnant for my grandfather. Right. And everything came out, and my grandfather was arrested. My grandparents got divorced. Everything, was sold, and, off we moved into low income housing, and, now we're living a different life. And, and I remember as a kid, I was growing up in a small town, so it wasn't like you could get away from it. Like everybody knew, and kids being kids, they ask a lot of questions, and you can't escape from the trauma. And of course, kids are repeating what they're hearing at home. So there was a lot of kids that were saying, well, my parents say that it's not true, that you guys are just making it up, that you guys are just troubled kids. So, I mean, you're already dealing with the shame of the abuse, but also, now that what everybody is saying about you, that it's not true. Right. And so at this time, I'm going into high school thinking it's going to be a little better.
Yeah.
Sorry, what's that?
No, that's okay. Because if you don't mind, I don't want to gloss over that, because for me, it's that right there where you were in that community and what was going on, for me was where a lot of I had to start warping my sense of reality. I like to say that it's like the sexual abuse. It's like my brain. It's like Humpty Dumpty. I was sitting on the wall because of the sex abuse. I fell off the wall. My egg got cracked, and I never could ever put it back together again. And I had to warp it to do that. So I don't want to be unkind or whatever, but I think just kind of as a kid, what was some of the mental stuff that you had to do to survive that?
I think I just tried to bury my head in the sand. I mean, like when the abuse came out and we were dealing with social workers, I remember sitting in the office with a social worker and her, having her come around and pat me on the back and saying, "Don't worry, everything's going to be okay." And I'm like 12 and a half. I have no idea at this point in my life what okay is.
Right.
Because I never felt, I always felt out of balance with my life, because coming from not living, like very early on, feeling rejection from my parents and not feeling that love. And I always say, like, my first childhood memory is sitting alone out on my grandmother's porch. And, like, all the work that I've done looking back, like, I look on that child and how lonely that child seemed and felt. And I think that that's really how I felt at the time. I felt so all alone. And here I was, 12, and I had just lost the only family that I knew. So I think, I felt really broken, but we tend to just bury it, like my grandmother was a staunch believer in, okay, we're fine, let's move on.
Right.
There was no real follow-up counseling. There was no dealing with anything. It was like, okay, this happened, let's just move on with life.
Get over it.
Yeah.
You get over it. Right. Because as long as you're talking about it, everybody else is talking about it. Right. So we just want to, just move on and pretend like it didn't happen, basically is how I felt. So that's just kind of what I did.
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, I don't mean it's perfect. How can I say? I really, really relate to that. One of the parts of me healing was getting over the fact that I'm not alone. There are a lot of other people who felt alone. There's just a world full of us who survived that abuse that we don't feel. We feel alone and feel isolated and denial and all that sort of stuff, but we're not. You're not getting to share this right now. So, but
no, I just wanted to ask what year about this was going on.
This was the early 80s. So we're like 82, 83.
Yeah, that's when my abuse came out, and I got the same reaction. You're alone. Everyone wants to brush over it, and I equate this with what was going on at the time. We were just now getting Phil Donahue on, and they Sally Jesse Raphael, and they were finally starting to talk about it, and there was one of two things that was happening out of it. Either the therapist planted that thought in your mind, so it must be a lie, or we have no Satanist in our family and we don't know any Satanists. So, and that's where it was coming from at the time. Everyone was saying it was either a therapist implant or you're part of a Satan cult or got involved in some sort of sacrificial Satan cult. And, I remember that happening and my mom thinking, verbalizing, this is not true. This can't happen. And so I was really alone in the idea that no one believed me on top of everything and had to keep it a secret. So, and that adds to you had no barometer of what was normal. So, what do you know? There was, this is normal. It's just everyone's keeping it a secret like I have to, and then suddenly it's not a secret anymore. So I think that's really important for women of our age. Actually, you look a little younger than me, but it's really important for women of our age to identify that's probably what happened, when it came out, because no one believed me. My mom was pretty certain I was lying.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times as well, no one wanted to acknowledge because it was so prevalent. It was going on in more households than anyone would ever admit it, but no one wanted to be the ones that stood up and said, oh yeah, that's happening in our family too. Right. So it was just, and as long as they're talking about your family, no one's talking about yours, the kind of way people looked at it. So, but
and it's just that whole thing in society where we try to make ourselves look better by climbing on top of other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. How much of it, and I understand it started at a very early age for you. How much of this did you internalize as your fault? Did you go through any of that?
You know what? I never really did.
Good.
I never looked at it as something that I did. It was just something that happened, because I think in my life, it just was a series of events that happened to me. That's kind of the way I had looked at it. I mean, I didn't, even when it all came out, there was no blame from my family members. And it was actually after it came out that I actually found out that my own mother had been molested and raped by her dad.
Yeah,
so I very early on developed anger because of that situation. I was like, how could my mom let me go here knowing that her father was a predator,
Right.
like I almost felt like the sacrificial lamb that had been sent to the slaughter. So I really didn't internalize any blame for myself. I was angry and blamed everybody else.
Right.
Yeah. And I've ran into that so much as sometimes we don't blame the perpetrator as much as we blame or feel the bitterness and feelings about the people that didn't protect us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and as an adult, that's kind of a disconnect. But you know, and then the other thing is what we had to do to survive that whole thing. Early on, if you tell the truth, you're going to bust the family up. So, which happened to you later on, but you know, there's just that disconnect. Thank you for going down that journey. I think that's going to be very, very helpful to a lot of us because of the continuity of just how this common experience is. But let's move on, Charlene. You didn't stay there.
No.
So what was the next step?
Well, so now I'm at the age where I'm getting ready to go into high school. So that just adds a whole other level of stress and emotional stuff that's going on. So I go into high school and I'm kind of thinking that this is going to be better because it's a bigger school. I'll be around people that don't know, but of course kids talk. So it didn't take long before people were talking about it. And really quickly on into high school, that's when I started dealing with my mental health struggles. I started feeling really depressed. I wanted to die. I didn't want to be here anymore. I was tired of feeling unloved and unwanted and all those emotions that were coming up. And I started cutting myself to start dealing with the emotional pain, and started drinking early on in high school. And a huge part of it was because I wanted to fit in. I didn't want to be that kid who was that stuck out as being different, because I always felt that way with the abuse. So I just wanted to be normal in my eyes, because, everybody was going out on the weekends and getting drunk. So, hey, I should too. And it was almost like I was battling this internal thing of, I remember my grandmother always saying, you're going to, don't be drinking or you'll end up being just like your dad. Right. And almost that rebellious part in me that, was like, well, I don't care. I don't want to be like, anybody else, because everybody else has kind of hurt me. So maybe I'll just be like my dad. And it also is just that coping mechanism of just numbing, because you just don't want to feel the pain. And I think that's a huge part of, why we drink and why it continues and why it gets so overwhelming, is because we just want to be numb to everything that's going on so that we don't have to deal with the pain, which is, completely backwards, because we end up just dealing with more pain in the long run. So,
but I think it's really kind of important, for lack of a better word, that we normalize why we made those decisions. The behavior made sense at that time. You're 16 years old. What's your job? Your job is to feel good about yourself, get educated, attract a mate or get a career, whatever the things that you want to do. And we've got this core abuse, this Humpty Dumpty thing that just shattered, for me, it just shattered the core of who I was and what I believed in. And drinking and drugging and all of that sort of stuff just kind of filled that hole. It just made sense. And for a little while, that stuff went away. So we beat ourselves up that we made those choices at that age. But man, it's just a normal reaction to how insidious what happens to us. So
it's all just coping. It's all just coping mechanisms, right? Like we're doing, we just did what we needed to do at the time to survive. So,
and in some ways, we almost have to honor it, Charlene, because it worked. Because we're here. So instead of beating ourselves up that we chose to react that way, it's kind of like, no, honor the fact that it got you where you are. Behavior's killing you, and you need to quit doing it, and you need to move on.
We haven't had anyone talk about cutting on the show, and it was something I did, and it was something my son did as well. At Selfharm, he had some issues with some scars and stuff from that. And what did that do for you?
Wow, great question.
The emotional pain that you hold is so overwhelming, right? And it's to me, the cutting was the lesser of two evils, because it was either, I'm going to kill myself in this moment because I need to release this emotional pain that I'm holding because it's so intense. So just the fact that you're cutting, and that for myself, and again, I don't ever talk for anybody else, but I know for myself, the physical pain was almost a distraction from that emotional pain that I was feeling, like seeing the blood pour out, was just this emotional release that I felt. And, definitely not an everyday practice for sure, because, being around my grandmother, she was pretty snoopy. So I had to be very careful. But the times that it happened, it was, in the darkest moments where I felt like it was, one option or the other. So
yeah, that's exactly.
And as it got into my teenage years, it became, more like those options were there. So
that's exactly, what I mean, my own feelings on it was, I can handle this physical pain, and I handle physical pain very, very well. Broken things and not even known they were broken, because I can do it. And I remember, cutting, thinking I can handle the physical pain. I can't handle the emotional pain. And, and then there's an aspect of self-harm. I want to hurt myself. I'm not worthy. But it was more about, it's weird. You do it to numb yourself, and you think, well, how's that numbing? Well, I'm numbing from the emotions. I'm not numbing from the physical. I've already numbed from the physical. I mean, it's the emotions that I don't want to feel. So I'm glad we touched on that, because I've never heard anyone connect in the way I felt it. You said it exactly how I felt it. So
instead of committing suicide, you released the emotional pain physically that way, which helped you survive that, which got you where you are. So once again, we run into behaviors that need to stop, that are not good for you, but they actually served a very deep purpose at that time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We talked about the addiction, it was Dr. Lloyd talked about the idea of addiction. If you don't get that drug, you're going to die. And I remember feeling that when I was cutting, if I don't release my emotions this way, my emotions are going to kill me. That was probably, I never felt that way with alcohol. I never felt like I was going to die with alcohol. But when it was cutting time, it sounded like that was a ritual, but when I cut, that's exactly what I felt. If I don't do this, I am going to die. I've never connected addiction in that way, but yeah, that's exactly how I felt.
And I think what's as important as we heal the shame and the pain of the abuse, the need to do that the need to survive in those severe kind of ways eases itself. Is that your experience, Charlene?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's all coping skills. So instead of being critical and judging them, it's like, this is what I had to do at the time, until I could find healthier ways of releasing that. So, which is what I did, because I kind of transferred from cutting to writing. And I started, writing a lot of poetry and getting my words out, because, I always said it was like either pour my words out onto paper or blood out. It seemed like at times there was that, one option or the other. So being able to just express myself and express those emotions and pour them out, it was healing. It was very cathartic at the time. So, but of course, when you do that, people read, because, I'm writing about suicide, and I'm writing about abuse and trauma. And of course, it's, really dark stuff. So, my teacher sends me to the guidance counselor, who sends me to the school psychologist, who takes me in for an afternoon and does all these questionnaires and assessments. And then, after the end of it, says, okay, I'm diagnosing you as bipolar or manic depressant. And I'm like, okay, I'm 16. I have no idea what any of that means.
Right.
And so now I'm just feeling like, okay, not only am I the kid who was, molested by her grandfather, I'm crazy on top of it. And again, like back in the 80s, there was no follow-up. Again, I remember the psychologist sitting across the desk from me saying, if you need to talk, I want you to come in and talk. Just so you know, everything's going to be okay. And I was like, I am so tired of adults telling me that I'm going to be okay, because I don't feel like I'm okay. Someone needs to stop saying that to me. And I'm thinking the last thing I want to do is talk about this. I just want it all to go away. I want to forget that it happened. I want to just move on with my life. And this is when I started developing the thoughts of, I just want to get out of here, and it's either geographically or life. I just want to get out of here. So I just kind of threw myself into my schoolwork, graduated from high school and moved away. And I moved away with my high school sweetheart and moved to a bigger city where I thought, this is great. I can just kind of blend into the crowd. I'll just be another face here. No one knows me. No one knows my story. I can just be normal, whatever normal is supposed to be.
But that is important too at that stage. Excuse me as I pound this thing to the ground. But when you're 16, 18, and 19 and 20, sometimes it's not the time to deal with that, because we feel like we're just going to completely come apart, lose it, cave into ourselves. So we muster up whatever youth and energy we have to go build us life, get us an education, get married, move, do all that stuff. So once again, at the right time, you did what you needed to do, which was not deal with the emotional pain and memory, but move on and make a life. But we find out later on that there does come a time that we got to deal with that. So once again, that's courageous. You just did what you had to do to survive. And I guess the other thing that I relate to is it's got to be bipolar. It's got to be this. It's got to be this. No, you had a grandfather who violated the biggest trust that he can with the kid, and it hurts and it destroys us. It's not bipolar. It's abuse. It's trauma.
Yeah, it was PTSD. I mean, that's, you know what I mean? The 80s, that was, like if you talk about PTSD, they're like, well, you weren't in the war, like you're, you weren't anything like that. And it's like, it wasn't a concept back then. So it wasn't even talked about.
What's the difference between an AR-15 rifle going off and the squeak of a step of a grandfather coming up?
Exactly.
Both violent noises that go on, both betrayal. So I'll get off my soapbox off. You're doing wonderful. You're doing so wonderful. I appreciate your courage and your braveness to talk about this.
So I'm like into my early 20s, and I decide my high school sweetheart and I decide that we're going to have kids together. We decided we wanted to be together forever. So
of course.
we decide that I'm going to get pregnant at 20, and I have my first daughter at 21, and I have my second daughter at 25. And I have my son at, I'm trying to think here, I think 25, 27. So when I had my son, and all the while I'm thinking as I'm having my children that this is going to fix the hole that I'm feeling inside.
Yes.
Right. That number one, that I'm going to be a better parent than my parents were. I'm going to break that generational cycle. I'm going to do all these wonderful things, and I'm not doing any of them. Because I'm still drinking. When I had moved to the city, I had gone to school with the hopes of getting, a secretarial job and, living a great life. And I couldn't get a job. And I had bills to pay. I had, things. I had a school loan that I was trying to pay off. So I remember sitting in my living room going, like, I'm going on welfare next week because I can't pay my bills. And a friend of my boyfriend at the time, who ended up being my husband, comes in, and she was working as a stripper. And she said, hey, you should come give this a try because you'll make great money at it. And I was like, oh, and I ended up doing that for 6 years. And it felt like the most normal thing. Because that's where I felt my value was. I had learned really early on as a child with sexual abuse that my value lied in my body and what I had to give.
Yeah.
And it fit because I could drink all day. It was great. I was just numb constantly. I was getting paid to be numb, and it just fit in with the lack of self-love that I had for myself at the time. Luckily I was able to shift out. I mean, I had 3 babies during this time. So, and I was only off for short periods of time in between. I managed to get a bartending job once I got pregnant with my son the last time. And I thought, no, this is time to get out of here. We got 3 kids. Our kids are going to soon know what, I'm doing for a living. And, started bartending. And again, as we were saying, it kind of fit into the perfect thing of, great, I can be at the party. I'm getting paid to be at the party. I'm sober. I'm not dealing with the hangover until I get done work and then sit and have a few drinks with the customers. So all the while, this is just, there's no healing going on. There's just burying it deeper and deeper. But it always bubbles up to surface. You can't run away. It doesn't matter how far you go. It's always going to come back up. So I started when I was 28 dealing with my mental health struggles again, and they were getting worse and worse and worse, and to the point where I was fantasizing about taking my own life. I was making plans. And at 28, I was in a spot where I knew that if I didn't make a change, my kids were going to come home from school and find me there.
Yeah.
So I remember sitting down and saying to my husband, it's like, I'm moving out. I'm not fit to be a mother right now. I can't take care of myself, let alone 3 young children. And he was okay with it because at this point, our marriage was basically over anyway. And I decided to move out and moved in with my mother-in-law because she said, come stay with me for a while. And I had the best of intentions of doing the work on myself. But again, my only coping mechanism at that time was drinking, right. And that is not any way to deal with mental health issues. So my drinking got worse and worse, and working at a bar. So about a month after I was separated, I met someone else. And they say like attracts like, and that is so true because he was extremely dysfunctional, just got out of a relationship, had mental health struggles that I wasn't aware of at the time, drug addiction, alcoholism. So we just seemed to be 2 dysfunctional people that hit it off and life will be great. But very quickly on into the relationship, it became physically abusive. And again, this kind of fit the narrative that I was living with because I didn't think I deserved to be treated well. I mean, I wasn't treating myself well, so why would anybody else treat me well? And I deserved the pain and the hurt. And I remember after one episode, this is about 2 years into the relationship, after a violent night, he had left the house and I'm sitting on the living room floor and I'm thinking, I can't do this anymore. Like, who am I kidding? I don't want to be here if this is what life is. And I went to my medicine cabinet and I took out all the pain medication, sleeping pills that were in there. And I took them all. And then I went and sat down on my couch and I grabbed a pad of paper and a pen and I started writing my goodbye letters to my kids. And I always say, I hope no one's ever had to do this because it is the toughest thing you could possibly do. But at the time, it absolutely saved my life because as I'm sitting there and crying and trying to find the words to say to my children to say goodbye, I'm realizing that I'm doing the same thing really that my parents did, that I'm leaving my children. Right. I'm abandoning them, but there's no coming back from this abandonment.
Right.
And as I was sitting there, I was like, no, I can't do this. So I called a cab. I went to the emergency room and I was sitting at the admissions desk telling this lady how I think I was overdosing on pills and I collapsed. And I woke up with tubes down my throat and my partner sitting beside me crying about how sorry he was and how everything was going to be different. Of course, it never is. And I got out of the hospital. He had called my mom and my mom had said, hey, why don't you move out west? Like, come out here, make a fresh start. And again, this fits into my geographical pattern of, hey, let's run away from our problems because that really works.
Yeah.
So I did. I packed up my kids and went out there and stayed with my parents and tried to get my life back in working order. 6 months after I had moved out, my partner moved out. Again, with the promises that, everything would be different, that he, knew he needed to change and everything would be great. but very quickly it slipped back into the abuse. And this continued for probably, I would say, another 10 years of abuse, adultery, alcoholism on both parts, to the point where I couldn't stand either of us, myself for staying and him for making me feel like I was, not worthy of anything, which it was my own belief. And I remember it was July 1st, which is Canada Day up here. And he came home and said, I want you to know I'm moving out. I'm moving in with someone else. And I was just devastated. I was like, really? You've put me through this crap for this long, and now you're just moving on to someone else, and I'm left here to pick up the pieces. And he moved out, and so I spent the next month trying to pretend like I was great and I was happier and better off, when inside I felt like I was slowly just sinking into darkness again. And I remember I had finished, so we're 2.5 months after he left, I'm sitting at the bar after work, hanging out with customers, and police officer comes in and asks to see me outside. And now I knew this police officer because he had been involved in one of our domestic disputes. And he informed me that he had just come on shift and saw a notice that my ex-partner had committed suicide, that he had taken his own life. And it's amazing how quiet the world gets in those moments. Everything just seemed like it stopped. Right. And all I could think of was, I'm going to have to tell my kids now, because this man, good or bad, had raised them for 13 and a half years. And how was I going to be okay? Because I think some dysfunctional part of me thought that we would get back together and he would decide that I was worth, being with, and everything would work out.
We do.
And now that was gone. And I felt abandoned in the most final way that you can. So what did I do? I threw myself into work, which is what I always did. I tried to stay busy, because as long as I was busy, I could keep the voices at bay. And again, it gave me the opportunity of being in the bar. It just, was normal to drink and be drunk all the time. And I just tried to go on with life. And very quickly, I realized that wasn't going to be possible. And I remember 2 weeks after his death, sitting with a good friend of mine and telling her how angry I was, and her going, well, it's okay. Like, anger is one of the stages of grief. And I remember looking at her going, no, you don't understand. I'm not angry he took his life. I'm angry he did it first.
Yeah.
And of course you say that and people are kind of like taken back, like, what? And I just kind of let it go. But I mean, I was so angry because here I had been left to pick up the emotional pieces. I saw the pain and the heartache that was left behind when someone made that decision. And, and I always remember people saying, I've never said this, actually. It's the first time I've ever talked about this, how people think it's very cowardly. Like when people would say it's a coward's way out. And I'm always like, if you've ever had a gun in your mouth and you've pulled that trigger, it takes a lot of courage to do that. Mm-hmm. It's not, and not that I condone it or anything like that, but, I was sitting there going, I've been in that position, I had been in the position of having, the pills in my hand again and the gun cabinet key, trying to make the decision which one I was going to do. Mm-hmm. And, realizing that my son was in the basement. And it's funny that we women always think about this. It's like, I didn't want my son to have to clean up the mess,
right?
If I shot myself. And I didn't want my son to have to be the one to find me if I overdosed on the pills. So I reached out, got a knife and cut myself. And then I was the one to clean up the blood off the floor. Right. And after that had happened, I thought, okay, I'm going to get some help. I obviously need to finally go and talk to someone. So I started seeing a psychiatrist. And, I remember about 2 months into it, asking her, like, I knew why I was messed up. I knew why I was doing the dysfunctional things that I was doing. On the surface, I knew. but I just wanted to know, how do I fix it?
Right.
Just tell me how to fix this and I will fix it. And, and I asked her, it's like, well, how did you cope with your mental health struggles? And I remember her looking at me, and it almost looked like her eyes glazed over. And she was like, I've never had mental health issues. And I'm sitting there going, then how can you possibly even relate? Like, how you don't know how I'm feeling.
Right.
So how can you talk to me about it when you don't know what I've experienced? And I think I kind of emotionally checked out at that point. And it was very shortly after I received a life insurance policy from my ex-partner's death. So, I've got all this money and I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? And I make a decision, I'm going to buy a house. And I remember telling my psychiatrist that, and she was so thrilled, because she's like, all right, you're making progress. You're making plans for the future. And I'm thinking, no, the plan I'm making is that this house is going to be the legacy I'm going to leave for my children.
Yeah.
Because I had shifted into making the decision again that I'm going to leave. They're better, you slip into that, they're better off without me. And I'm not good for anybody right now anyway. So they're just better if they can move on with life. And so here I am. I take possession of the house September 26th. Of 2016. And I've made a decision the next month. I'm going to give myself a month to get in, get settled, get my son in and settled. Because at this point, my older daughters have moved out and it's just my son. And I've set a date and I am going to take my life. I'm going to the same location my ex-partner went to, and I'm going to shoot myself like he did and just be done with it all. And about a week and a half before the date I had picked, which was a Monday, because Mondays suck. So what better day to take your life than on a Monday?
I
had a girl
on the weekend.
No, you don't want to ruin the weekend.
Friday night. No,
we'll drink.
Monday, all right, yeah.
You're going to be hungover on Monday, so you might as well do it then.
Yeah.
A girl I worked with, a friend of mine, said, "Hey, I want to go to this women's workshop. Did you want to come with me?" And I was like, no, that's the last thing I want, right? And she's like, please, I don't want to go by myself. And I'm like, ugh, that was always my soft spot, right? Like, I always cared about other people and wanted to make other people feel, good and help them out. Never mind myself. It was always all about other people. And I was like, okay, fine, I'll go. And I thought, it's only 2 days. I got to get through a Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday I'm taking my life. So it's okay. Mm-hmm. So I pull up to the workshop that Saturday morning, and I've got my hunting rifle in the back seat of my vehicle. And I enter this room of this workshop, and I immediately feel sick to my stomach, because I'm looking around at a room full of women who look like they have it all together, right? Like they are well-dressed, pretty. In my mind, I'm seeing all this, and they're chatting excitedly about their future and all the plans that they're going to be making. And I'm thinking, really, I am such a fraud. Like, I'm just sitting here just trying to get through 2 days so I can end my life. And these women are so excited about their future. And so I sat down, at the table with my friend and listened to the first half of the day to people talking about, health and fitness. And I'm thinking, not relevant, and finances. And I'm like, not relevant, because I'm not going to last much longer anyway. And then the afternoon session comes, and a woman gets up on stage, and she is bald. She has lost all of her hair from alopecia. And she starts talking about self-love and how traumatic her youth had been, not having any self-love because she was so different. As a woman, our hair is our crown, right?
Right.
And she had lost that. So she lost her feeling of femininity and her self-love and all of this. But she had learned to love herself. And the moment she did, her whole life had changed. And as I'm listening to her talk, I can hear this little voice in the back of my head. And it's like, what about you? And I'm thinking, yeah, how different could my life have been if I had learned to love myself? If I had stopped needing the validation from everyone outside of me and knew that my self-love was enough for me. And I kind of just brushed it off as like, well, it doesn't matter anyway. And then the next lady gets up on stage and she starts talking, and she's talking about mental health and her struggles with depression and suicidal thoughts that she's had for the last two decades, and how her life had changed when she embraced her mental illness and accepted that it was a part of her. And being a part of her, she had to love that part of her as well.
Yeah.
How when she learned to deal with it and stop fighting and pushing back against it, that her life had changed.
Yes, that's great.
And I'm, again, hear that little voice in the back of my head going, well, what about you? And I'm thinking, yeah, how different could my life have been if I could have learned to love and embrace this part instead of fighting this mental health issue? I could have just loved it as part of me. And then the last speaker gets up, and it's a gentleman. And he starts talking about his addiction to painkillers, his alcoholism, and how he was suicidal and had dealt with mental health issues, and how he had spent the last year prior to getting help trying to find a perfect mix of sleeping pills and pain medication and alcohol so that he could make his suicide look like an accidental death. Mm-hmm. Because he sold life insurance and he knew what he had to do. And he was divorced. His marriage had fallen apart, and he very rarely got visitation with his kids, but he had visitation of his kids one night, and that was the night that he found the perfect mix of drugs and alcohol. And as he was laying on the couch, knowing that here he is, he's overdosing and his kids are in the house, he heard a little voice in his head that said, no, not today, not like this. And he got to his cell phone and he was able to call the ambulance. They came. He was able to get help for his mental illness. He got clean and sober. He got off, all of the pain meds that he was on. And he had made the decision that everything that he had struggled with, by sharing it, it was healing him and other people. And his purpose now was to go out and share his story in hopes that he could give hope to other people.
Yes.
And as I was sitting there in that chair, again, I can hear this voice, but it's not quiet anymore. It's like screaming at me, going, what about you? And I'm realizing, I'm like, again, everything gets really quiet. And I'm sitting here going, what are the chances that I'm at a workshop that I didn't want to come to? And I've just heard 3 speakers that are talking about the 3 areas of my life that need help. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What if I could love myself? What if I could learn to live with my mental health in a healthy way? And what if I could take everything I've experienced, the child sexual abuse, the struggles with mental health and wanting to die, the losing a partner or an ex-partner to suicide, what if I could take everything I've been through and go out there and share it to give hope to someone else, to say, you know what, it's okay. It's okay to be in the dark, but you don't have to stay there. And it was like, you hear people talk about light bulb or aha moments, and that's exactly what it was. I made a decision sitting in that chair that, you know what, today I choose to live.
That is a spiritual awakening.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Good for you. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I decided, I went up to the lady that had hosted the event, and I had said to her, it's like, I would really like to sit down with you and let you know, like, talk to you about this event, because I wanted her to know the impact, because I was so grateful that, for so many things at that moment. I was grateful to my friend for, inviting me. I was grateful to all 3 of those speakers. I was grateful to her for hosting it. And so I ended up sitting down with her and talking to her. And I said, I would really like to come back next year to your event and speak, so that people know the impact these events can have. And I remember afterwards thinking, wow, we just actually did make a plan for the future. Wow, my psychiatrist would be so proud, right?
Yeah.
And I did. And I went back the next year and spoke. But before that, like at that event, there was a gentleman that spoke about, it was the MC of the event, and he talked about fear and how much we let fear control our lives. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, everything I've been doing is because of fear, really. Like it's a fear of feeling the emotions.
Yes.
You know, I was numbing them because I was afraid to feel them. Mm-hmm. I was afraid of doing things that took me out of my comfort zone because I was so afraid of what could happen.
Yes.
You know, I was in such a self-protective survival mode that I was afraid to do anything outside of it. So I made a decision to start, you know, doing things that scared me and that I could face rejection on. And one of them was, you know, I wanted to publish my book of poetry that I had written. Not for any other reason, but just to do it for myself, to say, you know what, I'm being brave enough to put it out there because that was me, raw, and the pain, everything I'd experienced. This is me, right? Putting myself out there. I went and jumped out of an airplane, you know, because I was afraid of heights and flying.
Good for you.
I asked someone out on a date because I was, you know, I'm afraid of rejection. So let's ask someone out, because if they say no, we can see that we're not going to die from that rejection. Mm-hmm. You know, so I asked someone out on a date. A month later, we went out on our first date. That was in December. And then we got married the next August. So it was, you know, I said that when I left that event, I almost heard a collective sigh from the universe, that it was like, oh, finally, we've been waiting, you know, like it was just everything was waiting for me to make that decision. And once I made that decision that I'm not just going to live, I'm not just going to survive, but I'm going to thrive, everything started falling into place. Wow. So I went back that next year. I spoke at the event. That was my first speaking engagement. And I remember before I got off the stage saying that my goal for sharing my story is that I can just save one life. Mm-hmm. And it would make everything I've gone through, all the pain, heartache, the years of suffering, it would make it all worthwhile. And I remember as I got off the stage and I was getting ready to walk out of the room, I had a woman approach me and she said, you know how you wanted to save a life? I want you to know today you did. And I kind of was like, all right. And then I heard that voice in the back of my head and it said, now let's go find one more.
Yeah.
Oh.
So that's my purpose now, is just I'm looking for that one more. Every day that I get up, I'm like, I can find one more today.
This is the ultimate Plato's allegory of the cave. This is what inspires and drives me. You know, you spend all those years in a deep, dark cave. And once you finally step out of the cave and you see the light, you know, it's hard. It's really hard. So you don't want to. You see the light. Your job is to go back in and pull other people out. And only you can do it because it's your story. And you're the only one that can speak their language. It is 10 days after getting sober. It is what gave me purpose. You know, someone said at a meeting that alcoholism isn't a curse, it's a gift. Mm-hmm. And now that I've had that experience, I got to step back into the cave and show other people the way. That's our job. And I think that's such a wonderful thing, you know, that we do that. So
I think it's so important, Charlene, and you've done such a wonderful job here today and what you're doing, that we talk about this, that we talk about the suicide. You know, we talk about, if we're making plans, go find somebody and tell them your plans. There's this insanity that we can squash it, that we can fight it, that we can make it go away, and we can't. If you're making plans, I mean, I remember early on, and I've been sober 28 years now, and I remember early on in my recovery, a couple of years in, that my life had completely come apart. I had that gun. I had that gun in my mouth. I had that gun at my temple, the Colt thing. And I can remember going to a very precious friend of mine and telling him, this is what I'm doing. Would you please hold my weapon? So he took my weapons and held them for a while. But after I told him what I was doing and talking about it and all that sort of stuff, I'm glad he held them, and he need to hold them, because this disease, I mean, all this stuff is insane. I don't want to call it a disease. All these thoughts and patterns and trying to get over trauma is insane. But by the fact that I told him, something eased and I went on. And for me, 28 years, deal with depression and all that sort of stuff, I am not going to kill myself anymore. But this desire for the pain just to stop is still intense. Life still hurts. I've just got to go, and you've talked about it, find purpose, find meaning, do something else. This podcast, the Now Sober Academy, where we work with families of people who are dealing with drug abuse and stuff, that's my purpose. And when I get up in the morning and I just want the pain to stop, I'll go, okay, well, I'm just going to go and do this today, and so I just really relate to your story and what you're doing and how you're doing. And you're just so courageous. We are courageous people to do this. Sure. And
I think there's almost this fallacy or this belief that getting well and dealing with it means that life's going to be perfect and life is going to be great. Like I tell the people, especially the women I work one-on-one with, I'm like, I still struggle. There are days that I get up and I go, I don't want to get out of bed because, like I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling exhausted. I can feel that darkness set in.
Yes.
So being honest and saying, what, like, my sobriety journey is extremely new. I've, the man I married had been sober for 20 years. And luckily he was really loving and supporting of me during my, the fact that I still drank, and then, I cut it down and was like, okay, I'm only drinking 1 day a week, so I'm okay. Right. And then realizing that, in 2022, I said 2022 was the year that was going to be completely different for me. And I made the decision. I said, no, 2022, I'm alcohol free. And I think that's the difference, is making the decision because I wanted to, not because I had to.
Yes.
And because my husband's always, checking in with me, how you doing? Because he knows he did, made some mistakes when he was drinking. And I'm like, you know what? Like, I never thought it would be this easy. And, and sometimes I go, it scares me because it feels so easy. But I think it's part of that whole self-love that I've embraced, that I'm like, what would I always, tell the women I work with? It was like, what would someone who loved themselves do? How would they treat themselves? And I realized that someone who loves themselves wouldn't treat themselves that way, even 1 day a week. Right. Yeah. We would stop using excuses. And I was like, no, so that's, I'm going to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. So,
well, and I think, Charlene, right here, that for those of us that are doing what we're doing, and congratulations on that movement, but it kind of goes back to your cutting. As we heal the pain of the shame and of the abuse, and we learn healthier ways to deal with that, the way, and I don't want to call them unhealthy, because drinking and all that sort of stuff and necessary of itself can be a wonderful tool for a lot of people to relax. So I'm not anti-drinking or whatever. I'm just saying the need to use that as a tool to deal with that is less and less. And as the pain is less, it's easier for me to move forward and make better decisions.
Absolutely.
And I know that if alcohol or drugs or illicit sex or donuts, whatever it is, if I'm using them to cover the pain, cutting, to cover this pain, I'm just making it worse. And the need to do those behaviors gets higher and higher and higher. And I get to the place where I actually set my brain up so that it can't heal. It can't deal, because I'm so damaged physically from the alcohol or whatever's going. So, but what I love about what you just said is this natural journey of healing as we get into the self-care. And that's the 28 years of doing this, actually longer than that, probably 35, 40 years of going to therapy. The self-love thing has been the toughest component for me. The self-acceptance, the fact that what you just beautifully described, what happened to me, how I survived it, what I did. I need to honor myself and care about myself and love myself. And being a boy raised in Lower Alabama, that was not the message that I got, this self-care thing. I still see it in the 12-step rooms that I go to. You talk about self-care, and us guys, we run from it. Women, we run from it. But it really is the basis for healing. And there should have been a question in here somewhere, but there's not.
I know that You were saying it was, it was easy. You just made the decision. It was easy. And I don't know how many times I have thought this is way too easy. I must be doing something wrong, and I feel guilty. Like I will sometimes say something about, because I've had some problems, I'm not perfect. I've had a few triggers that weren't real hard to get past, but I've had to stop and really look at what was going on in my head that caused the triggers. And I don't tend to announce too much. I do a little bit that it's been easy because I feel guilty about it. It's not, we're told it's not supposed to be easy. This is supposed to be really difficult. And I think that's a message we need to shift a little bit. It doesn't have to be difficult, and learning self-love, which is another problem I have. Learning self-love has helped so much, but I'm glad you said this. It's not 100% perfect. You still have those days where you go, okay, shit, I'm an imposter because I don't love myself today, but that has helped so much because now I know I deserve this easy road, it is.
And I think for me, what was huge was like, I kind of had a moment where, because of course, like I was not a great mom, doing what I did to cope. I wasn't always present in my children's lives. And of course, my oldest daughter got a little older and she started experiencing mental health struggles as well. Cutting, burning, so I completely related to it and trying to get her help and sitting across the table from social workers and, having my daughter, of course, bring out everything about, what I did and didn't do. And I remember saying to myself, not to myself, I said it to them. I said, you know what? I did the best I could with the tools that I had. And I said that, and I meant it because I was like, I was doing the best I could. I didn't have any skills. I didn't get any help. And then I remember walking out of that meeting and everything kind of shifted for me. And I thought, okay, if I'm willing to give myself that grace, because I was looking at it as I did the best I could. Right. Maybe I need to give that same grace to everybody else in my life that was involved in my situation.
Yeah.
Right. And I went, you know what? My mom did the best she could with the skills that she had.
Right.
My mom was a victim as well. So I need to give her the same grace that I'm giving to myself. I need to give the grace to my dad. I need to give the grace to my grandmother. And I even went so far as to give that grace to my grandfather. And I went, I let it all go, because we always hear the analogy that, not forgiving and hanging on to it is drinking the poison yourself and expecting them to die.
Right.
Right. Like my grandfather is long passed and my dad is passed and my grandmother's passed. My mom is still here. But I knew that part of my healing journey was that I had to forgive, not forget, but I had to forgive because I was doing that for me, not for anybody else, but for me.
Right.
Because hanging on to it was just fanning those flames. And I knew that I had to dose it to move on.
Your second spiritual awakening or another spiritual awakening. That's another part. We don't excuse the behavior that was done to us, but we honor the fact that they were doing the best they can. Wasn't worth the shit. Excuse my French.
Yeah.
Worth the shit.
Yeah.
But I was doing the best I can. A lot of it wasn't worth the shit, but the best I can is the best I can. And that healing and that forgiveness. And
that's huge.
Yeah.
That's really huge.
We don't, it's a process. We don't have a destination, but if there is a destination, Charlene, it's right there. What you just did, forgiving the world, forgiving God, forgiving ourselves, moving on, take care of ourselves, and then make purpose out of it, make meaning through giving it away.
Charlene, I want to know, because we're running out of time here, where can people catch up to you?
Probably the best place is on Facebook. I have a Facebook page. It's Charlene Madden, speaker and author. My workshop, which you can see my logo because
we loved it, by the way.
is the phoenix, right? Because I think we've all risen up from the ashes of where we were to where we want to be. My workshop, Ignite Your Life, you can follow that. I host that once a year in November, so it'll probably be virtual this year again. And I have a website,
I-
Ascension Wellness Studio. So that's where if you want to do some coaching, I do, some free programs. I do some one-on-one coaching. So you can reach out there and find me. But I always like to leave it with, and maybe we would get to that, but I always like to tell people the biggest change for me was knowing, like I said, I knew other people had experienced the things that I had experienced, but hearing stories and hearing people share so vulnerably impacted my life greatly.
Yes.
Right.
And so I always say, if people are struggling, I know how you feel. And I always let people know that I am available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You message me on Facebook. I will come and virtually sit in the dark with anybody. As we were saying, like you've been in that cave,
Right.
to go back in there. So my job is to go back into the dark, and I will sit with you until you're ready to rise up into the light. So
That's wonderful.
That's beautiful. When you get closer to your workshop, if you want to, let us know. We'll get you back on and talk about what's coming up.
Awesome.
And push that. I know that the Phoenix, I love that, because I say one of my sayings around here is, from the ashes and the rubble of our collapse is the foundation that we build our lives on. So that Phoenix is good. And the other thing that I say, and it's right around what you did about going back in the cave, I've found this working, sponsoring people that I sponsor. And I had a precious person tell me this other day, I was getting my 28 year chip, and she gave me my chip for sobriety. And she said, when she was working with Gina and I together, and she said that when I told y'all everything bad about me, she said, Vince, you said, I know that about you and I love you anyway. If we had a hall of fame of shame recovery,
Hall of Fame of Shame.
recovery, Charlene would be in it.
Now.
Charlene would be a member of this Hall of Fame. And, maybe through your workshop or something, maybe we need to start one or something, put Teal Flurry in there. And I got a bunch of people around here, but this Hall of Fame of Shame. God, I'm not right.
I'm not right.
I'm a sick person. I love it.
We are going to get your links on the in the info in this, and definitely we'll post this everywhere we can, because we want to get this message out. And I'm so glad we talked to you. I said before we came on that I saw so many parallels in your life and my life, and as we were going, they just kept coming out. And I wanted to address so many more questions, about this. I think you'd said something about you're being seen as a sexual object because of, that's your only value is a sex. And the first thing that hit me is I have thought for years that I have no value to women, because they're not interested in the sex, and if that's my only value. So there's so much more I'd love to talk to you about at some point. And let's see if we can maybe do that again, and definitely have you on for this. In fact, maybe for the empowerment, when you're ready to do that again, you want to promote it.
Awesome.
Come on, and you and I can have a conversation about being a woman.
The damage
that
happens. Yeah, the damage that happens when we're sexualized before we're emotionally, spiritually, physically, and intellectually ready to handle it. The damage that's done there, and part of that is we become sex objects. And I know y'all ladies, that's the primary way of relating. And then for the rest of us stud muffins out here, it's just a burden that. Sorry.
All right.
I can't help them. It's definitely out of time. I'm going delirious here without them. All right. So want me to hit the button?
Hit the button. Thank you, Charlene.
Thank you very much. It was so awesome to meet you guys.
Wonderful.
Yeah. We're looking forward to making a future with you. Let's make plans.
All right. Sounds good.
Yes. All right. I love you. Thank you so much. I know this is going to help out there. I've already got a couple of people in mind that are going to say, hey, listen to Charlene.
Listen to this one.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right.